I signed the marriage contract to save my father's honor. He, Dante Moretti, the mafia boss, signed it to buy silence. We agreed on 3 rules: no feelings, no jealousy, no attachment. But the one thing neither of us signed was the heart. I thought I was just a clause in his game of power, until he started breaking every rule he'd ever made just to keep me by his side. And that's when I realized, in the mafia world, the most dangerous thing isn't the gun. It's when a man like him learns how to love. That was the foundation, the cold, ugly truth I walked into the room with that afternoon. The memory of my father's face, pinched, defeated, right before the financial scandal broke and destroyed him, even though I knew he was clean. That was the anchor that dragged me into Dante Moretti's world. I was just a small-time lawyer, barely making ends meet, fighting the good fight for people who couldn't afford it. And suddenly I was sitting across from a man who owned the air in the room. He didn't look like the movie version of a boss. He was just intensely still, impeccably dressed, with eyes that saw everything and gave away nothing. He laid the document on the mahogany table, slid it toward me, and the ink on the page felt heavier than a coffin lid. He said I was there as a legal consultant to draft and approve the terms of a fake marriage between him and some anonymous woman. A politically expedient alliance, he called it. I spent 3 hours arguing points about asset protection and non-disclosure, feeling the weight of my father's name resting on my shoulders, knowing Dante held the key to clearing it. A secret ledger he promised only if I played his game perfectly. It felt like trading my entire future, my very identity, for a shred of justice for a dead man I loved, and I remember my hands shaking so badly that I had to curl them into fists under the table, just to appear professional. He watched me, not with impatience, but with an unnerving, calculating calm that made my skin prickle. When I finally finished my review, exhausted, certain I had protected the interests of this mysterious, future bride, I pushed the stack of papers back across the table. I told him the contract was ready for his proxy's name, and I reached for my worn, slightly frayed canvas bag, ready to walk back out into the light. That's when he did it. He picked up the expensive, heavy fountain pen, signed his own name, bold and decisive, Dante Moretti, and then, instead of signing the second-party line, he simply spun the document around and tapped the empty space. I looked down, expecting the name of the woman, the anonymous bride, to be there, maybe a placeholder. But the name was already filled in, printed neatly next to a second signature line, Lena Hart. The blood rushed out of my head so fast, the room tilted, and all I could see was that beautiful, terrible name. Mine. I felt the protest rise in my throat, a sharp, choked sound that died before it could become words. I stood up, slamming my hands flat on the table, trying to keep the panic from breaking through, and that's when he gave me that infamous smirk. The one the papers loved to photograph. The one that looked cold but somehow held a sliver of heat. "It's all set, Lena," he said, his voice low, steady and utterly dismissive of my horror. "Your name is already on the contract." I managed to gasp out something about this being illegal, about my entire career, about my promise to myself to stay clean, and that's when he leaned forward, moving just an inch, but making the distance between us feel immense. "You want your father's name cleared, don't you? This is the price," he stated, and the simplicity of the sentence was what broke me. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of ownership, and I knew, in that single, crushing moment, that I had been played from the very beginning. Everything I had worked for, every late-night studying, every pro bono case, every ethical decision, it had all led me to this room, to sign my life away. The truth was, I had no choice. My father's honor was the last piece of him I had left, and I would trade everything for it. Before I tell you what happened next, what I did when I felt that cold steel door lock behind me, I want to take a quick pause. If this story, the feeling of being trapped, of being underestimated, of fighting for something that matters more than money or fame, if this sounds like your story, then please, take a second. Open your phone, like this video, leave a comment below letting me know what you're fighting for right now, and hit that subscribe button. It helps us find more people who need to hear that they're not small, they're not alone, and they were never insignificant, even when the world tried to tell them they were. We're in this together. Thank you. The media, of course, went absolutely ballistic. The headline that screamed across every platform, "Government lawyer marries mafia boss," was like a brand on my forehead. It was surreal. I went from being a nameless public defender to the subject of every vicious talk show and tabloid piece overnight. My phone was a dead weight in my hand, buzzing constantly with calls I couldn't answer, messages I couldn't bear to read. But I did read one. It was from Miles Reed, my ex-boyfriend, a sharp, ambitious prosecutor who had once loved the idealistic version of me, but quickly grew tired of the one who struggled to pay rent. His message was short, brutal, and delivered the final emotional punch. "You just married the man I'm going to destroy? Don't think for a second you're off the hook, Lena." The coldness in those 20 words solidified everything. Miles wasn't just disappointed. He felt personally betrayed by my association with the very man he was hunting. That was when the logic of the situation hit me. The marriage wasn't just a personal sacrifice. It was a political, legal, and financial shield for Dante, and I was the human loophole. He needed my clean reputation, my legal background to create a firewall the authorities couldn't easily breach, and the only leverage he needed was my desperate love for my father. A few days into this twisted, high-stakes game of house, I started living like a ghost in his opulent Manhattan penthouse, which felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. I decided I needed to know every single word of that contract, the one I had signed under duress, and I spent an entire night comparing the digital file I'd drafted with the final, leather-bound version he'd given me. I counted the clauses, cross-referenced the paragraphs, and I found it. The marriage contract I signed only had 12 clauses, mostly standard prenuptial nonsense about separation of assets and public conduct, but the final, authoritative document, the one that now legally bound me, had 13. I ran my finger over the number, the leather cool under my touch, and read Clause 13. It wasn't about money or PR, it was dark, ancient, and terrifying, something that felt ripped from a medieval oath. If either party breaks the contract, their life and assets belong to the other. My breathing hitched. This wasn't a divorce agreement, it was a pact with death. I realized the true scope of his deception. He hadn't just married me, he'd acquired me, soul and body, under the most irreversible terms. I hadn't signed a deal for survival. I'd signed a life sentence, an irrevocable commitment. I waited until morning. The light outside the tall windows a mocking sign of the real world I no longer belonged to, before I confronted him. He was standing by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand. Looking out over the city he owned, I walked up to him, the contract clutched in my hand, the thick paper crinkling under my grip. I didn't yell. I spoke softly, dangerously, showing him the page. "You knew," I stated, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. "You knew about Clause 13 and you let me sign the version with only 12. He didn't turn around immediately, just took a slow sip of his coffee, which infuriated me more than any outburst would have. When he finally faced me, his expression was utterly devoid of apology. He met my eyes, and for a fleeting second I thought I saw something shift, something almost like pain, but it vanished instantly. "If I told you the truth, you wouldn't have signed," he admitted, his voice low, a near whisper that still carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "And I need you alive." The casual delivery of the word, alive, made the threat feel exponentially greater than if he'd screamed it. I stood there, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of his cold calculation, the man who saw my life as a utility, a means to an end. But before I could form a response, he changed the rhythm entirely, walking over to a nearby antique desk and pulling out a slim, gold-rimmed photograph from a hidden drawer. It was of an older man, handsome, with Dante's same intense eyes, but softened by a wry smile. "Raphael," Dante said, tracing the image with his thumb. My older brother. He was supposed to inherit everything. Dante then explained, in a voice that was suddenly hard, stripped of its previous calm, that Raphael Moretti had been stripped of his inheritance years ago for a devastating betrayal against the family, a betrayal that nearly collapsed their entire operation. Raphael, Dante explained, was now back, consumed by a need to reclaim the empire, and he was the one who tampered with the contract. He planned to use our marriage, the inevitable moment when you'd try to break it, to trigger Clause 13. He would claim your assets, the family fortune attached to the contract, and seize control. The whole thing was not a fake marriage. It was a deadly power trap, and I was the carefully placed bait. This revelation, that the contract wasn't just Dante manipulating me, but a chain binding us together against a mutual enemy, didn't make me trust him. But it did make me hesitate. I still didn't like him, still felt the deep wound of his deception, but the stakes had instantly broadened. This wasn't just about my father's honor. It was about two powerful, broken men fighting over a legacy. And I was caught between them like a fragile, necessary bridge. The marriage wasn't a romantic ploy. I understood that now. It was a political, legal, and financial cage designed to force a confrontation. And Raphael's plan was simple. Get me to divorce Dante, kill me for breaking the contract, and inherit the empire. The only way to survive was to stay, to endure the gilded cage and the cold proximity of the man who now held the key to my life and death. I felt a terrible kind of resignation settle over me, heavy and suffocating, and I knew I had to play his game. Then came the grand wedding, a sick, twisted joke of a celebration where every guest was a criminal, a capo, a consigliere, the very people Miles, my ex, was sworn to prosecute. Dante insisted on the lavish display, the opulence, the media circus, because in his world, weakness was death, and a silent marriage was weak. The chapel was overflowing with dark suits and designer dresses, but the air felt heavy, metallic, like a vault full of stolen money. I stood there, stiff and unnatural in the white dress, feeling like a sacrifice being led to the altar, and the whole charade just solidified the lie of my life. During the reception, a grizzled, imposing man, a rival mafia boss by the look of his cold, assessing eyes, approached our table, raised his champagne flute, and laughed, the sound loud and grating across the ballroom. "The Moretti Empire plays with lawyers now?" he sneered, the implication hanging in the air. I was cheap, replaceable, a trophy only slightly more useful than a decorative vase. Dante's hand settled lightly on my waist, a possessive, territorial gesture that was meant to silence the man, but it only made me feel smaller, more insignificant. In his world, I realized with crushing clarity, I was nothing but decoration, a temporary fixture for a man who bought everything he wanted. The worst part came later when Dante insisted on the fake public performance for the cameras, the required ceremonial kiss. As he leaned in, his face close to mine, I could feel the ice in his eyes, the absolute absence of warmth or affection. It was a transaction, an action performed for the benefit of the watching world, and I hated the way the cameras flashed, capturing the perfect lie. My lips brushed his, and I felt nothing but a hollow, desperate emptiness, realizing that the mafia bride they were branding me was a role I was now permanently locked into. That night, after the last of the grotesque well-wishers had gone, I couldn't take it anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thick with unspoken threats, and the need to escape, to breathe free air, was overwhelming. I slipped out of the master bedroom, changed into a simple pair of jeans and a dark shirt, and made my way silently down the grand marble staircase, my heart pounding a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I made it to the heavy iron gate, my hand reaching out, almost touching the cool metal of the latch, but a voice, quiet and devastatingly certain, stopped me dead in my tracks. "Step outside that gate, Lena, and you die." I didn't have to turn around to know it was Dante. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet carried the weight of absolute authority. I slowly turned, my shoulders tense, and he was standing just yards away, a dark silhouette against the lights of the house. I tried to argue, to tell him I didn't care about Clause 13, that I'd rather take my chances with his brother than live under his suffocating control. He just shook his head, a slight, weary movement that was more frightening than a shout. Raphael's men are watching. Miles's men are watching. You are my wife now, and to them you are my weakness. They will take you, use you, and kill you to get to me, all before the contract even registers the break. To protect my empire and your life, you stay here. The cold, hard logic of his statement slammed into me, forcing me to accept the terrible truth. My escape would be my immediate end. I was truly trapped, and the only person keeping me alive was the one who had imprisoned me. Weeks passed in a haze of forced dinners, public appearances where I had to smile and play the part of the devoted wife, and long, silent nights in separate wings of the penthouse. I used the time to work, to bury myself in the details of the Moretti family's complicated legal affairs, searching for any loophole, any scrap of information I could use to leverage my freedom. I started uncovering secret files, hidden accounts, and shell corporations, things that would make any prosecutor salivate. The truth was starting to coalesce. Dante wasn't just being hunted by Miles. He was being hunted by Interpol, the FBI, and half the governments in Europe. I saw my chance. I planned to expose him, to trade his entire empire for my father's exoneration and my own clean break. I worked in secret, creating backup copies of documents, correlating names and dates, feeling a desperate, cold sense of righteousness guiding my hands. The thrill of being a secret agent in my own gilded prison was the only thing keeping me sane. Then I stumbled upon a file that didn't belong to the criminal ledger, a worn, leather-bound volume tied with a fading ribbon, tucked away in a safe he thought only he knew the combination to. It was old, almost dusty, and inside, I found decades of legal notes, handwritten in a familiar, precise script. The notes were detailed, referencing old Moretti cases, legal battles, and private family trusts. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was my father's. A wave of nausea hit me, and I leaned against the heavy safe, trying to process the impossible connection. My late father, the man who had died in a financial scandal, was once the Moretti family lawyer. The evidence indicated he was working for them at the time of his death, and the financial scandal that destroyed him wasn't a separate event. It was the cover-up of a critical legal maneuver for the Morettis. I looked at the file title, The Solstice Case. The name was meaningless, but the dates were not. My father hadn't died in a legitimate business failure. He had been killed in the crossfire, a sacrifice in the same lethal game I was now playing. I didn't wait until morning this time. I walked into his study, the ledger held loosely in my hand, and I just stood there, letting the silence accuse him. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try to pretend he didn't know. He looked at the file, then back at me, and his shoulders slumped slightly, the first time I had ever seen a chink in his armor. He confessed, slowly, painfully, that my father had been his mentor, a man who saw the good in the family's legal side, before the rot set in. I didn't marry you to hide, Lena, he admitted, his voice barely a rasp. I married you to protect you, because the man who killed your father is still alive. He's the one pulling the strings, the one who benefits from you being gone. The shock of this revelation was profound. The world spun. Was he a cold-blooded liar or a protector? Was the fake marriage a cage or a shield? I stood there, utterly broken, unable to decide whether to trust or hate him, the two feelings warring inside me with dizzying intensity. All the calculated revenge I had planned suddenly felt hollow. That night, everything shifted. I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the cold businessman with the man who had just risked his safety by telling me the truth. Suddenly, he was standing in the doorway, silhouetted again, but this time he didn't feel like a threat. He felt like a fellow prisoner. He walked to the edge of my bed, sat down softly, and spoke, his voice unusually raw. "The reason I need you alive is simple," he whispered, and I could feel the heat radiating off him, close and unsettling. You're not just my wife on paper. You're the only one I need to survive." He didn't elaborate. He didn't try to kiss me or touch me or make a grand gesture. He just stated a fact, a desperate truth that felt like a lifeline and a burden all at once. The fake marriage had morphed into a survival bond, a shared destiny tied to the secrets of my father and the future of his empire. My father's secret wasn't just tied to the Moretti Empire. It was the key, and I, his daughter, was the missing piece Dante was so desperately trying to protect. The situation was complex enough. But then Miles, my determined ex, decided to throw a public hand grenade into the mix. I was in the office, trying to decipher a particularly nasty money trail, when a news alert flashed across my screen. Miles, standing outside the federal courthouse, all slick suit and righteous indignation, was giving a press conference. He publicly declared with chilling certainty, "Lena Hart, undercover agent within the Mafia." I felt a ridiculous laugh bubble up in my throat. The sheer absurdity of the lie a temporary shield against the real damage. The consequences were immediate and brutal. Within the hour, my license to practice law was suspended, a permanent blight on my reputation. I wasn't just a mafia bride anymore. I was a double agent, a traitor to the world I had fought so hard to belong to. The irony was suffocating. The world of law and order, the world I believed in, had destroyed me based on a lie, while the man who had kidnapped me was, perhaps, the only person telling me the truth. The worst part of this betrayal, this public stripping of my honor, was how it coincided with a massive gathering of the family, a council meeting that felt more like a den of vipers than a boardroom. I was asked to attend, Dante's reasoning being that showing strength and solidarity was the only way to silence the rumors that I was a threat. As I stood silently by his side, feeling the cold, assessing gazes of men who dealt in death and deceit, I knew I was being judged, measured, and weighed for my use. Vera Rossi, Dante's intensely loyal assistant, a woman whose eyes held a quiet wisdom, and who always seemed to know more than she let on, leaned in and asked Dante a deceptively simple question that sliced through the pretense of our relationship. "If she didn't love you, Dante," Vera murmured, her voice soft but audible in the strained silence, "would you still keep her?" I braced myself, knowing the answer would be the cold, corporate reality of our contract. Dante didn't even glance at me. He looked directly at Vera, his expression impassive, and delivered the blow that cracked the fragile hope I didn't even know I was nurturing. "Love isn't in the contract." I froze. The noise in the room seemed to vanish, replaced by a terrible ringing in my ears. I felt the sharp, cold impact of the words, realizing with a sick lurch that the sliver of humanity I had glimpsed in him, the shared tragedy of my father's death, hadn't changed the fundamental structure of our relationship. I was a pawn, a valuable, necessary pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. My mind screamed at me to walk away, to acknowledge the clear logic of his statement and sever the impossible knot that was starting to form in my chest. Yet my heart, that ridiculous, disobedient organ, wouldn't obey. I stood there, rooted to the spot, feeling the sting of his blunt rejection, even though I had expected and even demanded it from the beginning. It was a new kind of humiliation. Not the public mockery, but the personal, devastating confirmation that no matter what we had shared, what secrets we held, his loyalty was to the contract, and to the power it gave him. That was the moment I was forced to choose between reason, which dictated I should run, and emotion, which whispered that I couldn't bear to see him destroyed. The tension escalated almost immediately, the silence from the council confirming that they saw me as a liability. Raphael, Dante's treacherous older brother, chose that moment to strike. He set me up, spreading rumors through the family network that I was the one feeding information to Miles, that I was the double agent he'd accused me of being. The whispers quickly solidified into demands, and the Mafia Council, citing the need to restore honor and eliminate the perceived threat, ordered my execution. I heard the news secondhand, through Vera, who looked at me with a mixture of pity and terror. The atmosphere in the penthouse turned lethal. Every shadow felt heavy with danger. Dante was notified of the council's decision through a young, arrogant messenger who delivered the edict with a chilling lack of respect. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs as Dante listened to the messenger's cold recitation of my death sentence. Dante didn't say a word. He just stood there, his face a mask of stone. And then, with a terrifying speed that belied his previous calm, he moved. He killed the messenger. It was clean, brutal, and shocking. The entire room went silent. I stared at the body of the young man, then back at Dante, who now held a smoking gun and a look of terrible, final resolve. He had violated the law of blood, the absolute, non-negotiable code that forbade the killing of a messenger bearing the council's word. It was an act of treason, a declaration of war against his own family and the entire syndicate. He had chosen me over the law that governed his life, the structure that gave him power. He grabbed my arm, his grip hard and urgent. "We leave now," he commanded, pulling me toward a hidden escape route. We fled, racing toward a seaside villa in the dead of night, the air thick with the smell of blood and rain. When we finally reached the villa, a safe haven of simple elegance far from the chaos of the city, I couldn't hold back the question that was tearing me apart. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, echoing in the beautiful, silent room. "You just destroyed everything, your name, your power, your entire life." He turned to me, his clothes stained, his face pale, but his eyes were clearer than I had ever seen them. He walked toward me, slowly, deliberately, until he was standing right in front of me, close enough for me to feel the ragged rhythm of his breath. "Breaking every law," he replied, his gaze unwavering, "including the one that forbids me to love you." The confession was sudden, sharp, and overwhelming. The man who had denied love existed. The one who had claimed I was just a pawn had just betrayed his entire world, his entire identity, to save me. He had broken every rule in the Moretti Code, and for the first time, I knew his feelings were real, a force more powerful and destructive than any weapon he commanded. The price for that moment of honesty and commitment was catastrophic. Raphael, acting swiftly and with ruthless efficiency, took over the Moretti Empire. Dante was instantly branded a fugitive, his assets frozen, his network dismantled. His name was now a curse, a sign of weakness and failure in the world he once dominated. We were hunted, forced to live in shadows, moving from safe house to safe house, surviving on the scraps of his hidden wealth. But the worst was yet to come. I was captured during a routine supply run. Raphael's men were efficient, silent, and terrifyingly cold. I was brought before Raphael himself, a man whose polished charm only barely concealed a core of bitter malice. He didn't want to kill me, not yet. He wanted to use me to crush Dante completely. He forced me to sign divorce papers, not actual divorce papers, as he explained with a cruel smile, but a legal document designed to strip Dante of any legal protections still afforded by our marriage, effectively making him a lone wolf, completely exposed to the entire world. The press, fueled by Raphael's narrative, had a field day. "The woman who betrayed both worlds!" they screamed. I was branded a double traitor, first to the law, now to the mafia. I was a vessel for everyone's contempt, the woman who brought down an empire. I felt like the air had been squeezed out of my lungs, walking a tightrope between two collapsing worlds, with nothing left to hold on to. When Dante found me again, after I had been released, damaged but alive, he was thinner, harder, but still undeniably himself. We met in a dusty, derelict warehouse, the silence between us deafening. He looked at the divorce papers I had been forced to sign, the ugly ink a testament to my ultimate powerlessness. "If divorce keeps you alive, Lena," he said, his voice flat with exhaustion and resignation, "I'll agree." He was offering me my freedom, my life, at the cost of his own safety. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the man who had traded an empire for me, the man who had finally admitted he loved me. I smiled, a strange, watery smile that stretched the muscles in my face. "Then I'll sign," I told him, the words tasting like ash. "If you promise to forget me." It was the ultimate sacrifice, the final move in a game neither of us wanted to play. I was willing to sacrifice the love I had just discovered, the only thing that felt real, to keep him safe. It was a mutual surrender, both of us choosing to sacrifice ourselves for the other, believing that pain was preferable to loss. But love, I was learning, cannot be erased by ink, no matter how final the document seemed. It was a bond forged in fire, one that transcended contracts and laws. The twist came from the most unexpected place. Vera Rossi. She found me, slipping into my miserable hideout one rainy evening, her face grim. She wasn't just Dante's assistant. She was the keeper of his secrets. She revealed that Raphael hadn't just used me to get to Dante. He had committed a far greater crime. He had forged my signature on a separate set of documents long before my capture, designed to steal the entire Moretti family inheritance, claiming I had transferred all my supposed rights to him as my legal representative before the wedding. He was trying to eliminate Dante and steal the empire simultaneously. The truth was simple. He wasn't after Dante. He was after the money, and he was using me, the unwitting mafia bride, as his fraudulent proxy. This changed everything. It wasn't about love or betrayal anymore. It was about exposing a colossal fraud. Before I could process this, news reached me that Dante was in grave danger. He had infiltrated an international casino in Monaco, where Raphael was hiding. A last, desperate attempt to reclaim what was his and clear his name. The operation went sideways, and Dante was gravely wounded. A bullet lodged too close to his heart. I rushed to him, somehow managing to bypass the chaos and find him in the makeshift operating room of a back-alley clinic. He was pale, sweating, barely conscious, and as I held his hand, the leather-bound copy of the original marriage contract, the one with 13 clauses, slipped from my pocket. I picked it up and reread the dreaded Clause 13, the one that stated that life and assets belonged to the survivor. But as I reread it, the light hit the page strangely, and I saw something faint, almost invisible, handwritten in the margin of the document, next to the final clause. If one dies, the other inherits everything, including the sins. It was a final, horrifying coda to the contract, and in that moment, I understood its true meaning. This contract wasn't just a legal document, it was a ritual, a binding of souls where the survivor was forced to carry the moral weight of the deceased. I held him amid the smell of antiseptic and blood, tears streaming down my face. "If you die," I vowed, my voice ragged, "I'll bear your sins. I'll carry the weight of everything you've done." He opened his eyes, just a sliver, and saw the terrible resolve in my face. He whispered 2 words that changed the course of both our lives, 2 words that rejected the very notion of sacrifice that had defined our relationship. "No, this time I choose to live, for you." For the first time, neither of us chose sacrifice or duty. We chose to live and face the impossible consequences together. The contract was no longer about death. It was about the desperate, terrifying choice to survive. The story Raphael spread was swift and absolute. Dante Moretti is dead. It was a lie, but a necessary one. With the Mafia Council and the international authorities hunting him, Dante had no other choice. His death was his final, brilliant move to dissolve every legal and physical bond that tied him to his past. He vanished completely, his name scrubbed from every database, every record, every document, the ghost of a once powerful man. Meanwhile, I was forced to flee the country, assume a new identity, a new past, and start over in a place where no one knew my face or my criminal connections. The loss was profound. I had lost my name, my career, the man I loved, all within the span of a single year. Each year, on the anniversary of our forced wedding, I would receive a white envelope, always from an untraceable post box. always containing a single, crisp white card with 2 words written in Dante's unmistakable sharp handwriting, Clause 14. I never knew what it meant, just that it was a tether to a life I couldn't forget. 5 years later, I finally returned to the place where the nightmare began, the old financial district building where my father was murdered, the site of the Solstice case cover-up. It was raining, a cold, miserable downpour that matched the perpetual ache in my chest. I stood in the alleyway behind the building, the location I had tracked down through my own quiet, relentless investigation, and ran my hand along the damp, moss-covered brick. I wasn't looking for evidence anymore. I was looking for closure. My fingers brushed against something rough, a small, subtle engraving hidden low on the wall, almost obscured by the dirt. I knelt down, wiped away the grime, and saw the etching, Clause 14. Below it, carved into the stone, were the words that finally broke the silence. None of us are truly free. It wasn't just a final clause, it was a realization, a statement of the human condition, a testament to the price of survival in a world built on contracts and rules. A single tear tracked a path down my cheek, but before I could stand up, a hand touched my shoulder. A large, warm, impossibly familiar hand. I felt the electric jolt of recognition run through my body, and I slowly turned, unable to believe the truth of what I was seeing. Dante stood there, older, with subtle lines around his eyes, but alive and whole. His voice was low, rough with emotion, and steady despite the storm around us. "I broke every law," he whispered, wiping the tear from my face. "Except one. You." His death was the masterstroke, the only way out of the unbreakable rules of their world. He had destroyed the system from the inside, burning the old empire to the ground to keep us both alive. We found refuge in the quiet coastal villa, the first place we had ever shared an honest moment, and I knew the final act of defiance had to be mine. I retrieved the original marriage contract, the beautiful, terrible document that had dictated our fates, and with steady hands, I held it over the hearth and set it on fire. The leather curled, the clauses dissolved into ash, and the oppressive weight of the document finally lifted. Over the ashes, still warm in the bowl, I took a pen and wrote a new contract on a fresh piece of paper, a contract with no laws, no rules, no deceit. I read it aloud, my voice clear and strong. Clause 1. We live. Clause 2. Together. Dante's infamous smirk returned, but this time it was warm, real, and entirely for me. "This time," he said, taking the pen from my hand and signing below my name, "the contract is yours." And just like that, the most dangerous man I had ever met, the one who had tried to buy my silence and ended up trading his entire world for my safety, yielded his power completely. We vanished into the mist, 2 people who walked through hell, leaving behind no laws, no contracts, only the quiet, powerful freedom of choosing to love. There are still days when I look over my shoulder, I won't lie. You don't walk away from a world like that without scars, but every single morning, I wake up to the quiet dignity I earned, not the quiet humiliation the world tried to give me. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below, and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.